You're listening to a Skewed Orbit original podcast.
Time, weather, and always pass.
Friends, it's Rach. I'm so excited for today's episode. If you are an OG, if you have been watching and listening through this whole process, you are really, really going to love today's episode. Even if you are new, I don't want you to go, oh, this episode's not for me. Listen, baby, everything's for you. Okay, from me to you. I have my husband on the podcast today. He is a creative producer. He's my baby daddy, my husband, my creative partner. But he's an absolute content and media genius. He is a stand-up comic, a podcaster, and a wonderful father. And today, I wanted to hear what his perspective of being my husband has been. Meaning, like, even the other day I was like, I'm sorry, I'm just like really going through some deep healing. You know, I just need a little bit of time. And he was like, baby, you've been healing since the day I met you. Okay. So just for that aspect alone, I was really curious to hear kind of what his perspective has been. You know, when he met me, I was only a few months sober, and, you know, he met me as I was doing stand-up, talking about, you know, being in my sexual prime. So I'm sure I just really looked like, wife and mother potential. So I'm just curious, you know, really what the journey has been like for him, and then how it's informed his own spiritual journey as he defines it, and just what that has been like for him, because I think that will be, I feel like it's like a peek behind the curtain, right? I'm like, I've shared so much here and I'm so vulnerable in this space. I think it'll be an interesting conversation to really hear like what his perspective has been. And then we'll hear a little bit more from him and his creative process and how that works for him, and how he defines his spirituality and creativity, as well as his relationship to Judaism, and how that has informed him and his work moving forward. So please enjoy this episode and welcome my guest and my husband, Alex Gettlin. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's an honor to be invited on your podcast. I've listened to at least some portion of almost every episode.
Because you've edited them?
Correct.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for being here. Do you want to introduce? Oh, I guess,
Thanks for being here.
or thanks for having me. Do you want to introduce me? I guess you already did the intro.
I already did the intro. Everybody, they're on pins and needles. They got to know the juice.
Got to know the juice.
So, okay, so here's what I wanted to hear from you today.
Yep.
Maybe this is a little selfish, but I think that it'll be interesting. Okay, he's mugging the camera. You can't see it, but that's what just happened.
A little selfish. It's your show, so that's okay.
That's true. She did name it after herself, but
well, that's just smart branding.
well, thank you. Because my joke is always that a podcast by any other name would just be harder to Google. Mm-hmm. And also, how many like manifest or like empower you? Like,
Right,
there's
yeah.
so many white women doing
You know what
same.
they remind me of? You ever go into like a corporate, some like sales office, and they have those like motivation posters?
Yes.
And it's like a guy rock climbing, and it's
Yes.
like, perseverance gets you to the top.
Yeah,
It's like,
teamwork, and it's everybody that's just like smiling and like doing trust falls.
well, you got to think too, like, there's nothing more depressing than like a guy who's like just 15 years into like a call center job that he hates, and seeing some dude like out rock climbing, like actually living life. It's like,
it's actually a really great opening to like an adventure story. As somebody's there, and then he just has this wild like, fuck it, I quit, and he like rips the poster off the wall, and he's like,
yeah, it'd be funny.
I'm going out.
Did you ever see that episode of The Office where Michael tries to track down the chair model? Because
No.
he like has to order new chairs for the office, and he like falls in love with the woman in the catalog, and like recruits Dwight to help him try and find her.
No, we'll have to find
And
that
then
one
I think they find out that like she had since passed, and Michael wanted to have like a funeral or something for her.
Stop.
I think
What season is this?
I don't remember. Well, we're rewatching it.
I know.
We have been rewatching The Office on Peacock with like the deleted scenes cut in, which I will say the episodes are too long, but it's kind of fun to see all the stuff that they shot and never used. But anyway, this is your show. You take it away.
No, I love that. I've been loving watching that. But yeah, so that's why we named it The Rachel LaFour Show. Easy to find. Yep. It can grow and move. This is my second to last episode of this season.
What's the last one?
Me.
The only thing you love more than me is you, right?
Yeah, I feel like that should be for everyone.
You should love yourself more than your spouse?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's a different kind of love.
I think the concept of self-love, while important, is sort of weird in some ways.
Say more.
Because, listen, I think the concept of self-love is beautiful if you also have like self-accountability, self-awareness, like honest introspection, but like radical self-love and not the other things is actually incredibly damaging. Like if you're just like, oh, I love myself, I'll do whatever makes you feel good. That's hedonism. That's not good. But I think that I think there's this idea that we have now that like believing in radical self-love, which is a wonderful thing if coupled with the other stuff. But I think the problem is people now, with kind of the way our society works, fall into this trap of like, if it doesn't make me feel good, it must be wrong because it's not a part of my self-love journey. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But you and I talk about this all the time where I'm like, loudest voice wins.
Yep.
So that's why you get all these people who are like, well, I just didn't like that person anymore, so I'm out of that relationship.
Or that job. Or,
they didn't, right. That they just float from thing to thing because there's this, I mean, anything can be weaponized, right?
Yeah.
Meaning, so it's even being like, well, I like love myself. It's sadical, like I'm giving myself grace. It's like to just not do the thing that you say you're going to do, that I'm not going to take you seriously, right? So to me, radical self-love means loving myself anyway. Meaning through that uncomfortability when I'm trying something new, through all of those failures. And I've arguably had a lot of them even within the last month of trying a lot of things, trying a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And it's very humbling when you're like, well, certainly everyone will show up. And then you're just like, oh, okay, all right, I guess that didn't work. And you have to adjust and you have to do things. And so for me, that idea of radical grace, of radical self-love is loving yourself anyway. You know, if you're wanting to get more in tune with your body, so whether that means that you want to lose some weight, you want to gain some weight, you want to better your eating, whatever that is, it's not, oh, I didn't do everything perfectly today, so I'm a piece of shit. The radical love is going, isn't it fucking awesome that I'm courageous enough to try?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in complete agreement. And I think this is, I've said this to you before, and I've said it many times. If I were to have one sort of like, oh, this is how I understand the world now post having children, I used to think that an easy life is what you wanted to have a good life. Like a good life and an easy life were synonymous. And that's very untrue. A good life is a fulfilling life because being a parent is not easy. I mean, there's moments, sure, but it's probably
when they're sleeping.
But it's like the hardest thing that most people ever do. And I also would say, not everyone, but I think most people who have, I mean, I guess I'm kind of assuming here, but most people that I know, anecdotally and just like, you know, whatever, seem to agree that their children are the best thing that's ever happened to them. There's exceptions, of course, unfortunately, but I think most people with kids would agree to that. And they would say their kids are the most difficult thing about their life. So in that same vein of radical self-love, I think a lot of people who want to go down these like self-love journeys don't want to accept that, like, yeah, real true self-love means making yourself do really difficult things, really, really hard, making a good relation. I mean, listen, our marriage is far from perfect. It's pretty great, but it takes a lot of work. I mean, we put a lot of work into showing up for each other.
Yeah.
But it's easy because neither one of us is particularly selfish. That, I think, in couples that I can think of that things didn't work out well, one or both of the people kind of selfish. and didn't want to and didn't understand, kind of back in that self-love thing, they misconstrue being selfish for self-love.
Totally. But that's why I posted this recently on my socials, and you know this because you were there when we got married, that I gave
familiar.
that I gave myself a ring.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people are like, oh, what is this, like radical, like feminist bullshit? But to me, I'm like, me making a vow to you, easy. Me making a vow to myself, way more difficult. Because the truth is, it's like, for sickness and in health, that's not me taking you. That's me taking me.
Yeah.
That's me being like, it's up to me to take care of me. And that the benefit is when I'm taking care of myself, and sometimes that means doing a lot of projects in a day. And sometimes that means going, I really need to rest today. It's having that awareness of what else that it is that I need so that I can show up fully in our relationship.
It's from Cartier, right?
Yeah.
Didn't the gal at Cartier, she was like, I mean, I guess she's a salesperson, but wasn't she like, oh my God, this is the most beautiful thing?
Yeah, she still follows me on Instagram.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I will say,
making fans anywhere I go. You know what I mean?
I will say, this is the most if you don't know me at all, like if you just only know Rachel and you're just learning who I am, what I'm about to say is like kind of my whole personality in a nutshell. You know what I love the most about that ring is because you spent the money that you could have spent on a wedding dress on that ring instead. And it's such a more practical purchase because the wedding dress you wear for one day and it just sits in a closet forever and gets no use ever again. That ring you have on every day, 24/7, and it's solid gold. It's such a better investment. And just the practicality, I know that you had like a much more spiritual reason, which is beautiful and whatnot, but for me, like just the like practical common sense logic of spending that money on that piece of jewelry, because effectively neither one is like quote unquote necessary.
Sure.
It's a gift to yourself to commemorate this beautiful occasion, getting married. But it's like wedding dresses are such a waste of money with like the markup and just given how little they're used. So I was just so like proud in that moment that you like chose to use those resources so much more efficiently.
Well, I would argue that it is slightly spiritual because I always say that the most spiritual is whatever is the most practical. Like that's the thing, that there is actually this tie between the things we do here on earth with the things that are unseen. And that's so much of what I want to teach, of like this idea to be spiritually connected doesn't mean that you have to go to like, a sister moon circle retreat in Alaska, okay, no judgment, just jokes. All of these things are beautiful, and I love all of those things. But I think when we condition people, specifically women, into this idea of like this kind of like over the top, then it just becomes another thing to do. It just becomes another thing that feels unattainable. It just becomes another thing that we're chasing. And in fact, the things that are the most practical are the most spiritual. I mean, I also totally agree with you on the wedding dress thing, but I have a different argument entirely for that. But
Do you want to share it, or you wouldn't have time?
I mean, I don't know how intriguing it is, but somebody's driving going, well, I'd like to hear it. So here you go.
Okay.
I mean, for me, I do think that there are people out there, and specifically women, who are like,
boring. Sorry, keep going. That was me.
Shots fired. That do want to feel like the princess. They want to feel this thing on the day. And I am not that person, but it's also not fair for me to say that that's hogwash. I do think that that's very true. I think that the real underlying is that we've convinced women that if their wedding day is not perfect, then like we've put so much pressure on this thing where it's like people used to just do it outside of the general store.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, here's your llama, here's your lamb. Okay, thanks. You guys are married. And so I think when it becomes about everything else needing to be perfect, we lose out from what the actual experience is.
Of course. But we'll keep going unless you have.
You can go.
I just, people, I mean, this is more a question women get than men, but men too. They're like, is your wedding day the most wonderful day of your life? Like, dude, no, I wouldn't even put it like top 5. Like the 2 days that our boys were born, for sure. And then like, yeah, we had a lot of great memory from our wedding, but like, I even remember just times like when we just were kind of, this is more pre-children than post-children, but just like laying in bed, maybe a little stoned, just giggling and being silly. Like, dude, I would for sure. Like,
I agree.
The wedding was like a beautiful experience, but it was like, yeah, sure, But I mean this in the least condescending way to the listeners. If anyone takes this the wrong way, I'm sorry, kind of, but it is what it is.
Oh, what a beautiful invitation. Please proceed.
We do not have boring lives.
Sure.
I mean, we, our lives aren't super exciting at the exact moment because we work from home and raise our boys all day.
Very
and whatnot.
repetitive. Yeah.
But we're chasing a very unique, fulfilling dream for our family and for our personal careers. Like we're very lucky that we linked up and worked out so well together, because it would be hard for someone, I think, to want to come along for this ride who's not like really in it. What I'm getting at is, for some folks, if they just don't have a thing in their life that keeps them being feeling exciting, and they're doing something of achievement, which if you don't need that, that's fine, like whatever. But I think for someone like that, the wedding is much more important, or because they want to show off to their social circle.
I think it's a lot of the lather. Lather is what you do in the bath, but or the shower. You know what I mean? I don't know your life, but no. The only amendment that I would put on that, I think the reframe for me is as simply as like, yes, when you are ambitious and passionate, and there's other things that you are chasing in your life to make you feel fulfilled, to make you feel of service. These kind of milestones that we've just arbitrarily chosen in our society, that like those are the moments.
Yeah. You
have a little bit more of clarity of like, they are important and they're valuable, but they are not to be the most valued. Because I also agree where I'm like, to me, I mean, the ability to, we were so unique where we got married during COVID. And I think the thing I actually ended up loving the most was that we live streamed. You know that you were there, but for the listeners,
I set it up.
That we live streamed it on Facebook. And I think it ended up being so much more beautiful because I actually felt real connection with people later when they messaged me and they're like, we were so happy we got to watch it. How beautiful. And like, even though I didn't get to see them in person, like it was COVID, we weren't seeing a lot of people anyway, but I felt like there was real, genuine, like people witnessed our vow. And that was the way that I felt versus like, and I love like looking back that like a lot of things didn't go right. It rained in the desert. What the literal F? I know people are like, but raining on your wedding day is a blessing.
Well, this was distressing for you.
Alanis would say that it was ironic, but
boo.
He's there.
How was Alanis? It's Alanis?
No, what did I say?
Alanis.
Oh yeah, no, it's Alanis Morissette.
You hear that?
Also,
Alanis?
she wrote that album at like started writing it at like 18 years old.
Yeah.
And I'm
young
like in
people
fifth
were
grade.
talented in the previous era. No, that's a mean thing to say. There's plenty of young people who are talented now.
I don't think it's a mean thing to say. I think it's a misguided thing.
It's a misguided thing. It's not fair, because what has happened with the rise of the internet is people who are not very talented have been able to dominate the conversation because they've figured out how to corral a spectacle around themselves where they didn't exist quite as much back in the day, where I think the young people who did get a lot of attention, obviously I'm referring to like celebrities, they probably had a little bit more talent or something of value. I mean, Eddie Murphy, I think, like recorded those 2 specials before he was 21. And he was like on Letterman, like making whoever was the host, Carson maybe, I don't know, but it's one of those iconic late night hosts, like had him on the couch after his stand-up set, like yucking it up at like 19 years old. That's
Johnny Carson.
It was, must be Johnny Carson, right? Anyway.
But I'm sure the same with Letterman as well. But yeah, at that time that it would have been Johnny Carson. But and that goes into a whole other thing about like talent and what does that mean? And you and I know all about that and navigating like, what does that mean? And my biggest thing is always like, but what are you saying? Like there's so many, I'm not one to like argue an audience. You got 2 million people following you. You arguably, I can't argue. There's no arguing there. I can have an opinion about it.
Sure.
But to be like, oh, it's dog shit. It's like, no, it's not. 2 million people beg to differ.
Okay, but let me push back on that a little bit. I don't totally disagree, but I think you have to weigh that like 2 million people for like how the longevity of that.
For sure. Yeah, I'm with you on all that.
Because there's many things that had like tens of millions of eyeballs for like 6 months and then completely faded back. And listen, that's still cool that person did that. But Like, remember that song, Gangnam Style?
Yeah.
Yeah. That guy, Psy. I mean, he's still huge in Korea and, like, good for him. But, like, yeah, he popped up in the American, like, culture scene for a minute. Kind of, oh, whoa, this is the song. And then it's like, all right, we're done with you. Thank you.
But I also think that's so much and this kind of gearing us back into this idea of like creation and like spiritual and like, what does that mean? When I say creation, I don't mean like the creation theory, but I mean, like to be creators, like to be fueled by creating and making things. I think that's so much of it, because when people get stuck in this idea of like fame or wanting to be seen rather than just doing the thing because it's the only thing they know how to do, which is like what that feels like from Eddie Murphy, what that feels like from that album, from that Alana, like, oh, I'm going to say her name wrong again, but I don't know why. Alanis
You
made.
almost said it again.
I know, I don't know why. But the whole point being that, like, I think when you're in it, because there's almost this part of you that like needs it, that has this need to create.
Yeah.
The longevity is there, whether the fanfare is there or not.
I get what you're saying. What I would not counter, but throw as a caveat to that is that there are many folks where that need to create exists. And then once they become comfortable, they have a certain level of money, they have a certain level of fame, they have a certain level of whatever, that starts to dwindle. So then the need to create kind of comes from like, I want to keep up my lifestyle.
Then I would argue they don't actually have the need to create.
I think it depends on the person, the artist, because I think for some people, maybe it exists until they get to a point. And think about how many musicians, comedians, whoever, where they were like really putting out cool stuff when they were young in their career. And then, I mean, we know a lot of comics. I won't say their names just because in case one day we ever interact with them, but who like their recent stuff after they've been famous for, decades. You're like, dude, this is terrible. Like,
well, yeah, because a lot of that is like, I mean, struggle is funny. And so again,
struggle is funny after you've struggled. It's not funny in the moment of struggle.
No, I know, but isn't that comedy? It's tragedy plus time is comedy. I mean, that's the whole mathematical equation of comedy anyhow. But I don't even mean struggle as far as like, anything even traumatic, but I mean like when you're out doing comedy clubs and you're doing the midnight show for 4 drunk people, you're doing it because you need it, because you love it. And it's like once you get to that place where like you're doing arenas and you just walk out and people start screaming, yeah, there is this part of you.
Well, that's why Steve Martin stopped doing comedy.
Right. Well, that's what I mean is I think that true artists shift, create. I also think that there's like this, we talk about this a lot of like the idea of like integration. I mean, now when people are putting out specials once a year, like you haven't had any lived experience.
Yeah.
But why I asked you to be on the podcast, because you and I talk like this all day long. We even have a podcast together. Common Ground, check it out, coming back in January. So we talk a lot. But I was just curious because I feel like since I met you mere months after I quit drinking. So like at the literal tipping point of my life that I know it so far, everything was changing radically and at like a radical pace. And like, even when, you started to develop some serious feelings for me and very eloquently, you were like, hey, here's what's going on. I kind of want to know what's going on. And I was very honest where I was like, I don't know. I was like, I know I like you, but I was like, I know I just got sober. Like, everything is shifting for me and I can't guarantee you anything. So from that point and being able to like where we are now, and then, it's like when you had me, we met at a stand-up show. And I'm hawking jokes about being in my sexual prime and just getting sober. Like certainly not the jokes where you'd be like, I feel like that's wife material, So like,
well, let me interject for a second. First of all, I'm a comic. I've been a comic for a long time. So I have an acute awareness of like, just because someone's talking about a certain thing in their act. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily mean like that's where they're at in their life right now. It could just be funny thoughts and moments that they've really workshopped and, well, that like, so because long story, very short, the show that I met Rachel on, I was co-producing it, so I was kind of during the night like running around doing different things, just keeping logistics going. So I don't even remember watching your set that night. I just remember talking with you after and feeling very like there's just certain people when you meet them and you're like, oh, I feel differently. Like there's some, like you said, it felt familiar.
Yeah.
Right? Because you
always
think we met in a past life.
Well, I can always, I'll tell that story. But I can always tell when you like people because you step in.
I do?
Yes.
Who else have I done that for?
Well, sometimes if you see other girlies that you think are kind of cute.
Not
in an inappropriate way at all. And I don't say that to be shameful. I don't mean that. But, you know, I mean, listen, our boys already have it too. They see a pretty girl and they've got a huge smile on their face. And I'm like, already this young, this is when it starts. But so I can always tell, and that's not always necessarily just with women. I mean, even with men that you find interesting, there's still that it is like you get locked in almost like your physical body is like, boom, I'm in it. And I remember being acutely aware of that.
You're like, what's up with this guy?
When we were talking, I was very curious because there was so much swirling around. And yeah, I was just very curious.
So much swirling around. What do you mean?
Meaning like, I know there were like people partying and stuff that was going on. So I was trying to suss out, like, is he a party guy? Like, what's going on?
Well, it was convenient that we met when we did because I was very much in that window of like, I think I'm done dating for fun. Like if I'm going to spend my time with someone, investing my energy and the money, whatever, like dating is expensive, but that's even secondary. It was more just like the emotional energy and the time. And, you know, like I think it was 30 or 31 when we met.
I think you were 31.
Yeah. And I was like, I'm getting to that window where, you know, the other days are ready to be over. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But so, yeah, so we were dating for a while. Things were getting more serious. And then to go back to the past lives thing, I went and I shout out to City Acupuncture in Silver Lake in Los Angeles. If you guys are looking for good acupuncturist, it's phenomenal. It's like more community setting, so it's more affordable. They do take certain form of insurance. I absolutely recommend it. And so I was going there for acupuncture, and I had this very vivid vision of it was at night and it was this very dark space, and I was in like really heavy like clothes, almost like I had like I could tell that it was like cold outside, and based on the way that this tent was set up, I was like, oh, I'm some sort of either like not necessarily like a princess, but if we're thinking about, like, it felt like Game of Thrones era. So like
how convenient.
What?
Just listen, I think this is beautiful.
Well, let me finish the story before you shit on it, Gettlin. Okay.
I'm not shitting.
So, but and I'm like pacing around. So it felt like either like my dad was like the general or something. So it was somehow like being.
Let me tell you something. Bert LaForce is not a general. Okay.
But I was
a wonderful man. But he is not commanding an army.
But I was being like protected in some way, and I'm like pacing, and then all of a sudden, what I presume was you like burst through, and you have all your armor on, and you were like, listen, I have to go. And I was like, you cannot leave. And you were like, I have to go. And you were like, I promise I will find you again. I'm like, if you go, you're not coming back. And you were like, I promise no matter what, I will find you again. And you gave me the most beautiful kiss, and you left. And I came back out, and I was like, holy shit, he found me again. I didn't tell him that for a long time, because I'm sure if you've had visions and things like that and you're on the level, you're like, oh, that's fucking beautiful. And then if you're not here for that, you're like, yeah, that just sounds like an imaginary made up thing. So I'm like, I'm not going to tell him. So it took me a while until I told you that. And you remember what you said? You got a big smile on your face. You go, could be true.
Yeah, that sounds like that's well, yeah, it could be. I'm a little skeptical, but I mean, listen, I'll say a couple things. I'm not skeptical in the way of like, oh, that's bullshit. Like, I don't have any information that makes me believe that like that is unrealistic. I'm simply saying I have never experienced anything remotely in that world. So beyond, like, you never know. I can't really offer anything. Like, it sounds very sweet. It also sounds like if you wanted, like, I guess my whole thing with a lot of this stuff, past life and visions, like, nobody has a past life of themselves being a dirtbag. Like, nobody has a past life of them or even just being like really boring. It's always like this incredible, like, oh, and then this beauty, which is, listen, those are core memories. I get it. But like, if you're really looking at your past lives, like 90+% of your past lives are like lame. You know?
Well, I know, but I have that in my stand-up where
Right.
it's like, yeah, everybody thinks they were Pocahontas, and it's like there was one Pocahontas and like 1,000 secretaries. You were most likely typing, So yeah, I'm here for all of that.
Think about what a bummer it would be if like you like, I want to see one of my past lives, and then it's just you like in ancient times as a slave. Like,
But
just,
I don't think that they're all. When I did a past life regression, I ended up in this is like very heavy, so trigger warning. But I would tell you the whole idea of it, but maybe one time I'll do an episode all on my own past lives, just if you find that interesting. But very sadly, I ended up taking my own life. And so I don't think that they're all.
you had a past vision of this?
I did a past life regression, with a practitioner. And that was very sadly how it ended.
How did you do it?
So I saw myself, I'll give you the Cliff's Notes, I was German. It was like a German family, and we had just moved. I think it was like around like Ellis Island. So we'd just come over. So we're basically living in like the ghettos of New York. And I had a lot of siblings, and my mom was an alcoholic, like not really around. My dad wasn't there, but my grandmother was the one that mostly took care of us. And so the core memories that kept coming back to me were on Sundays, I would go, it was like the most special day for me because I would go with my grandmother to get the fresh bread for the week. And so I was always the kid that got to go with my grandmother. So we were very, very close. And then when I was about 15 or 16, my grandmother passed away. And I ended up like leaving my home. Like everything was like so just like falling apart. So I ended up leaving. But I was very conventionally beautiful. So like long, like blonde hair, blue eyes, don't mug to the camera. And, but I'm just saying this was important where it was like she in this life knew that the only thing that was going to get her out of this situation was basically her beauty and the way that she looked.
Yeah.
So, but she was this really beautiful singer. And so then the next things that I was really seeing was like this, like kind of like a cabaret nightclub.
Yeah.
And so I was like a singer in this club.
Yeah.
And then I was very lonely. Like you can feel like the depression and the sadness. And there was like an apartment like above the cabaret that I rented out from the guy who owned it. And he was kind of the only guy that kind of looked out for me a little bit. And then there was this other man that was shown to me that very clearly like loved me, but he was like very sweet and docile and like I think in many ways thought he could like save me from this life, but like I just was so far gone. Like there, I was like, I will destroy you. Like there's no, and so
you'll destroy him.
But meaning like she was not at all in a position to be able to like enter into that type of relationship and be loved. All she ever knew her whole life was, rejection and poverty, and that the only people that ever loved her kind of only like loved her for a night.
When was this vision?
When did I have this past life regression? When we lived in our apartment in Hollywood.
I guess just like when I hear things like this, it's like, but couldn't that just be like your imagination having like a fun like adventure?
Yes, but imagination is a lot of times it has to be prompted, right? So a vision is more where like you turn on the TV and then you see everything there. So a vision, at least in my experience, I'll speak for me, is a knowing. Imagination is an unfolding. I have to think through, I have to see. So like if I do, even when I lead guided meditations, I'm guiding somebody to imagine what they're imagining, what they're seeing. And so they can use that of whatever they see. That to me is different than a vision that kind of like drops down.
Again, just like I said, I'm not saying any of this is.
Anyway, she was addicted to opium and.
So it was like an unintentional.
That was
Who
the
knows?
sad thing when I came out of it. And I'm like, I think very sadly it was one of those, I don't think it was intentional, but I don't think that she was sad that it was
like, who cares? Yeah.
That it was done.
Well, man, that's a bummer. Listen, I don't, no part of me is like, oh, that's ridiculous. Like, no way that's true. It's just like I said, it's like, I've never experienced anything even remotely close to that. So I'm just like, yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm not an idiot. Like, it's certainly possible that some people can see and experience things that other people can't. I've just never had anything in my life that was or if I have trouble identifying it or recalling it. That sort of I can relate to. That's like, yeah, that does. I know what you're talking about. It's all like, I don't know.
I mean,
man.
the one thing I would say for you is I feel like your ability to create ideas and not just like script ideas of like, oh, this would be funny or like, I mean, to fully somebody says one thing to you and in a matter of 3 minutes, you have an entire like run of ideas for somebody,
Yeah.
right?
Usually, yeah. Which, by
that-
the way, hit me up if you need creative consulting. That is a business that I have.
There you go. AlexGettlin.com. Coming to you soon. It'll be all of there and all of the content ideas. So, yeah, hire him. We'll put all that in the show notes.
Jokes aside, if you're a listener of Rachel's show, chat 20 minutes, like no expectations, totally free. Just like, let me know what you're thinking. And, I'll see if we can do something together and we'll take it from there.
But yeah, always be promoting. I love it. Let them know.
Just DM Rachel if you want my info.
No, all of your information will be in the show notes. This is a proper episode, okay?
Right.
We're going to showcase you just like we do everybody else. But what I mean to say is like, I would argue it's like that is so much higher. Like wherever it is that you're pulling all of that from is so much. That's not to belittle you, but just I think is showcasing where it's like those things literally appear out of thin air.
That's true.
And so quickly that it's like the only way that is possible is that it's like drip, 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 right?
Yeah, the analogy I've heard, and for me, I feel like it very much works, is that like for some creatives, it's just like your brain catches a radio signal, and whatever happens to be broadcasting on that channel, your antenna will grab it in that moment. Because a lot of times.
Yeah, I just want to point out like how incredibly spiritual that phrase is. Like the idea of like being attuned, and this is not me trying to like, this isn't a persuasive essay or anything, but just meaning like.
Sounds like it could be.
Well, but I just mean the ability to recognize what that connectivity is. And, a word that I often go back and forth with a lot of these quote unquote spiritual words, because again, there's those radical self-love idiots that are on the internet ruining them. So I don't ever want to deter people who may be spiritually curious by using some of these words in this way. But frequency is one of those words, meaning like that is a frequency, that is something beyond you that you are tapping into, that I think is really beautiful.
Well, thanks.
Yeah. Do you, I had something else I was going to say and then I forgot, but I'm just curious of what, like for me, all of this transformation has been like so radical, right? Going back to that word, but I'm always curious because you're like, I don't know. I feel like you're just like kind of the same. So I'm curious because like,
I don't think you're that different.
You saw me after that one show where I had like a complete breakdown in the car and I was like, it was a stand-up show and I'm like, what's happening? What's happening to my comedy? So I'm just curious, like from where we met, like where we are now, do you see this as like a radical shift or what's been your experience?
I don't think it's a radical shift. I think if I knew you 5 years prior to when I met you or 10 years prior, maybe I would see a radical shift. But you and I are very different about like our art, like our creative like we're both comedians. I think of comedy, like the way I do comedy, it's just like, is this idea interesting to me? Yes. Where can I put the jokes in? Great. Is it working for an audience? I'm not like, but like, what's the meaning? Like, is it going to touch their soul? I'm not belittling that. It's just like, that's not who I am. It's like, did you laugh? Great. Did you have a new thought that, cool. I think you're so much, and I'm not, like, so a lot of times when I talk about this, it sounds like I'm making fun of you. I'm not. It's just
I mean,
you're just so much more like into, or it's such a focus for you to like, and you want to enlighten people. You want to like speak to them in a way that like, frankly, I just don't care about. Not saying there isn't value there.
Clip it.
I'm just saying like if somebody came to me right now and said, "Hey, Alex, I would love advice on being a father with young kids." I'd be like, great, I have plenty of advice to share with you. But if they're like, I want advice on like how to be an entrepreneur, I'm like, I'm still kind of figuring that out myself. So I don't really I'm happy to talk to you like back and forth brainstorm, but I'm not like, or just, I don't know. I don't think I have anything to like, the world has to hear this. It's like, yeah, I think I'm pretty funny. Maybe you'll like my jokes. Maybe not. That's fine. You really feel like this calling to like people can be doing so much better, and I'm going to help them get there. And I think the shift for you was because you love making people laugh and you're very good at it, and you're just very good entertainer in general. And I think up until kind of that window when I started to meet you, you were so laser focused on being the funniest person and being the best entertainer that you weren't really listening to the voice that was like, there's more for you. Where I just don't have that. Like like if somebody saw a piece of, whether it's one of my podcasts or my comedy, and they felt like moved to like become a better person, I'd be like, wow, great. I didn't know that I didn't know that existed in my art for you, but cool, man. But I don't. So for me, I don't relate to it directly, but I've only known you pretty much since you start. Like when I met you, you were already kind of entering into this world anyway. So it wasn't.
That makes sense.
It wasn't like I knew you when you were drinking and smoking cigarettes and staying out till like all hours of the night, just working on your improv characters.
Yeah.
Like when I met you, you were already like radically overhauling your own life.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, yeah, it does make sense that, I mean, the only major differences I think is more so where you and I aligned is like recognizing that like traditional Hollywood, one, is just like bad for art in general. Like it's a business. It's not like Los Angeles and Hollywood is like, it's not really where things that are great art are created and fostered. It's where it's packaged and sold. I mean, there's exceptions, of course, but in general. And also, I think you and I realized too, with the nature of how things were changing, the nature of the internet, the nature of what our skills are, like we don't have to wait in line to get picked. Like now it's your turn. And also like, it's not even a good system to do that anymore. So we sort of, I think very well, like complemented each other, moving away from that at the same time and building our own thing. So I saw you kind of like getting out of that window. I mean, there were a few times where you did auditions and you were like, man, if I get this audition, this could be really, like really do something for me, which yeah, theoretically, maybe it could, but even if you get the role in the thing and you have your 3 lines on that sitcom, it's definitely cool for sure. But like the number of dominoes that have to fall into place after that are completely out of your control. It's like so many, it's like, yeah, whatever, dude. Like it's, Yeah. So I think, in summation, I would say, well, I find your jokes much funnier now because I help you write them. No, I'm kidding. I do help you write them. I will say this is the big difference between Rachel and I. I would say between the two, because they're always like, who's funnier? Who's, people are like, you're both comics. Who's, it's like sixes. I will say, if you could quantify it on like a chart, I don't think you can like really measure talent in like metrics, but if you could, I would say you are more talented in like the scheme of like just a performer and your ability to like evict emotion from an audience and to like connect with people on a stage. You for sure have talent. I can do that too, but I don't have a problem admitting like you're just better at it than I am. But I think in terms of like taking a raw idea and crafting it into like a proper joke and articulating, like word economy is so important in stand-up. And if you don't really write or do comedy, sometimes you don't understand these things, but it's a very long process most of the time to take like a funny idea and make it a really well-crafted joke. I'm just better at that than you, which is why we help each other. So I think you've evolved in that way because you were doing like, improv and characters before, which is very funny, but it's a totally different muscle. And I've seen you we've helped each other in this way many times, but your brain has already started to learn how to write jokes in a more stand-up way from just the way we talk and understanding, oh, don't use this word, use that word, or maybe if I do this analogy instead. But I think like what's important to you or like what you're trying to do, it's not any different. I think you're more aware of it.
Say more.
I mean, again, I didn't know you when I met you, but you've always like I can do things that you cannot do. what I mean, and I'm not saying one is better than the other, but like you lack the ability to be vindictive, which I guess is as good in some ways. But I've also not maybe vindictive, but there have been moments where I've seen you get kind of rolled over.
Yeah.
Because you don't have the words you use. You don't have the venom that I have.
Yeah.
Now again, you probably have more control over anger than I do. So it kind of could go either way.
Yeah.
I don't have any like serious anger issues, just for the record. I'm not like violent or something, but like, and that's what you always talk about with our kids. You're like, oh, if they have like my heart sensitivity and your venom, they're gonna have so many superpowers. It's like we are biased because we're their parents, but sure, yeah.
I mean, they're pretty great though.
Of course, but I'm just saying, it's like.
No, I know. I mean, for me, it's more now of like boundaries. It's also the more I know myself, I'm not even putting myself in those situations.
Yeah.
Like now I can see those situations and those people coming from a mile away.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about like even having to have that confrontation because I'm able to state what the boundaries are in the beginning. So if we do end up in those situations, because we don't always get to choose who we work with, like I'm able to be like, hey, this was the agreement from the jump. So if you're having feelings or that's not working, like that's on you. Like I was clear from the jump. So it's like I have better learned how to take care of myself in that way versus I feel like a lot of times for you, this is a very general statement. But again, it's like if somebody wants to fuck with you, you're like, dude, fuck off. Like you're like, I don't even care about your feelings. Like if you're trying to fuck around here, like this is not your spot, right?
Yeah, there's very, very few people in my life that I think it would really rattle me.
Yeah.
If we like never spoke again, you know, like you, the kids, both of our sets of parents, and like 2-3 friends, maybe. Yeah. And everybody else, it's like, that's unfortunate, but what are you going to do? You know?
Let's tell everybody about the way that you categorize people. So you have the GRC.
Oh yeah. That's the Good Riddance Club. That's where, because, so I came up with that at some point and it was just like, really from watching some of the people that you were dealing with that I was like, they're not worth your time. But it's not, here's the difference, okay? There's the Good Riddance Club, which is like, there's no vindictiveness. Sure. It's just like, get good riddance, dude.
Good riddance.
It's not even worth the energy of being angry.
Yeah.
That's the majority of people that there's been some kind of rift with.
Right.
Now you can be in the WBC, that's the Welcome Back Club.
Yeah.
Where you make amends. Right? And it's like, listen, maybe I did something wrong and I own up to it. Or, it's okay. Welcome back. It's fine.
Yeah.
You can go from the GRC to the WBC. And the other club is the GFYC, the Go Fuck Yourself Club.
Yeah.
And that's like when you're really out.
That's hard to come back from.
Near impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very few people are in the GFYC.
Yeah. So many so that we don't even really know it off the top of our head.
I don't really have anyone personally in there.
Yeah.
But this is like a silly thing. I mean, I don't really walk around with a list.
Yeah, we're not Santa. Checking it twice.
No.
Well, that's interesting because you're probably right. Where like at the point that you had met me, so much of that internal work I was already doing, meaning like I feel like I had emptied out so much of the bullshit in my life. Mm-hmm. So really it's just been like kind of putting myself back together, if that makes sense, of where I'm like, if I'm like in my mind, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to do this again, and I mean do this, which is like really put myself out there and make cool shit and figure out how to get it in front of as many people. And to your point, like help as many people. Again, this is not to say I think you guys listen to me enough that you know, but it's like, I'm not saying that it's like I'm here to save lives. That's not the idea. But it's the more that I show up fully as me, I trust that will give you permission to fully show up as you.
Yep.
That's the whole idea, right? That it's self-revival. It's not, I'm not a healer. I'm not going to save you. But I do feel this sense of human responsibility to show up as fully as possible.
Yeah.
And express myself as much as possible in a way that I feel like then I'm creating real art.
There's definitely like a fine line between like when someone's like, this is more, I think more women do this more than men, but I could be wrong. Like kind of radical healing and all this stuff. But the fine line between that and just being like an insane person. Because I remember like the first time I like went to your place and in your bedroom, you had these like floor to ceiling glass like mirror doors, and they were like covered in like writing. Like,
Yeah, I probably looked manic.
well, I was reading some of it, and I was like, okay, she still seems like she's on Earth, you know. But like,
They were all my goals.
right. But what I'm saying is, like, typically when you walk into someone's bedroom and there's just like writing all over the walls, it's like, are you trying to like kill somebody or solve like a conspiracy theory?
Yeah, what is this?
You didn't have
There's
the
just red twine.
You didn't have the
Yeah.
string going from thing to thing, but I was like, man, she's really in it. Okay, you know. But to that point too, it's like, oh, you weren't doing this thing I'm going to share. One of my biggest pet peeves, things that makes me just like, I roll my eyes at people who do this, and I refuse to do this. So maybe sometimes I fall into this lane too much where I hold myself back a bit. But people who are talking about doing a thing and they're not actually doing anything, like, oh, I'm doing blank, or I'm gonna blank, and they're taking no action to make it happen. It's like, I don't know why it bothers me so much. I mean, to a point, if someone just says that and they're not really in my life, I just kind of roll my eyes. Like, people we know, I won't say who, but like, yeah, I'm just, as soon as I do this, then I'm finally gonna do that, and I'm just kind of like, okay, dude. But it's just always driven me nuts, and so I almost don't like talking about upcoming projects or goals until there's like real serious action in motion, because it almost feels like, well, no, you're just lying. You're just lying to yourself until you're really doing it. You're just having these aspirational thoughts, which is neat. That's a neat thing. Ooh, that's fun. But like, head pat, what are you really doing?
Yeah.
You know, does that make sense?
Yeah. So the writing on the wall you felt was more encouraging rather than deterring.
Yeah.
I think you also just thought I was cute, so it didn't matter what was on the wall. You would have slept over.
I think I was very intrigued, because I think some of the gals I had dated a bit before I met you were pretty boring. No disrespect, but I was like, this ain't going nowhere.
Yeah.
You know, so then I was like, oh, you were actually very interesting. I was like, oh, finally, like, I really like this lady, and she's like very funny, you know, has interesting thoughts. So I think it just intrigued me.
Yeah.
It wasn't, and it also wasn't something like, they felt like, I don't even remember what they were, but it wasn't things like buy a Porsche and live on the beach and
Yeah.
you know, it's like,
Well, it's funny because
date a man who's 6'2".
two of them, one I remember was get 10,000 followers on Instagram. The other one was buy this house.
Oh yeah, well, we did that. You did both.
I did both. And then the others at the time were just getting like script ideas that I had done.
Getting 10,000 followers isn't that many. You should really up it to like 1 million, because 10,000 is
But
very.
that was 5 years ago when that was the goal. I mean, the goal is now shifted. Now the goal is just, 250. We'll get there and we'll go from there. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think I've realized now, I started crying to you the other night in bed where I'm like, honey, our boys are so little and they're not always going to be this little. And like, what does this mean? And like, I think for me, it's now like I have spent so much of my life going after and doing the thing that I love just enough. But I don't think I fully believed that I think there was a sense of like deserving where it was like, well, other people deserve to be able to self-express, or other people like there was, and it's like, what? No, it doesn't matter. Like at this point, I'm like the purpose of me self-expressing is it's almost even like mental health. Like I just feel better. It's the way that I work. It's the way that makes me feel good. And hopefully, yeah, God willing, the plan is that I can light a bunch of other people up and get them excited to express themselves and to do their work and what that means. But I think for so long, I was doing it just enough to where I wasn't one of those people. It's like, oh, this is the thing I'm doing. Like I was auditioning. I was booking a few things. I was doing stand-up, but it's like, man, I think back and there are no regrets. It's just lessons learned. But like, if I really would have turned that light all the way on, like where would we be? But also
We'd still be stuck in Los Angeles.
Well, that's true. But it's also like, turn it all the way on. Like I didn't know what to say.
Yeah.
Like that's my biggest thing. Like when I like mentor comics or creatives in general, where I'm like, this is good, but I don't believe you, because it's like the best jokes are the one where it's like nobody else could tell that joke. Like that is where it's like, that was yours. Because there's a difference between topics
Sure.
Dating is a topic. Going to the airport is a topic. Uber is a topic. But it's not a personality and it's not a point of view. And I think that I had to go through all of this stuff and the rebuild and being alongside you and knowing, like, I think the thing that balances me out, right? All these women that are like, I'm looking for my conscious king. I'm looking for my conscious king. And I think the thing that I love the most about our partnership, even though sometimes it's a struggle for me because we see things differently, is the other benefit is I also think that it does keep me grounded because you allow me to see sometimes where it's like, I think when there are the things that, even if it's not authentic to you, but it's authentic to me, you're like, great, then go get that ball. But you also know sometimes you're like, now you're just running in circles. Like, you don't need to go. And so I think having that,
Been a few of those,
like that balance, I've always said that it's like, I really think ultimately it's like you are my protector in this life. And that most of the time it's you protecting me from myself. Right. Like
there's been some times where, and I've also learned there's a few times where I was like, I need to step away and let you get to this conclusion on your own because it'll go over I mean, now I think, not that I don't want to use the word like I've earned your trust, like we trust each other, but like I think now there's been enough sort of that where you understand if I was like, we shouldn't do this. You understand where it's coming from.
Yeah.
It's like, not that I would ever try and control you, but like there's no intention beyond like I just know better for you in this case.
Totally. And I think that's been interesting for me because conversely, it's also where like sometimes I try to push you farther because I think you enjoy safe harbors where it's like, until I can see to the other side, I'm not setting sail on this bitch. And I'm like, no, get in the boat. Like, let's go. I know. I'm not saying that's in always, but I'm saying typically.
Yeah.
So I think it was hard for me, yes, to earn that trust that you know me as well as you do, because it's true where it's a balance. Sometimes you get in the boat and the boat sinks, but sometimes you do get in the boat and you get to the other side. So, if I'm going to continue with this analogy, that having you as a skipper, as my co-captain, is smooth sailing.
Well, the skipper is not the co-captain. The skipper is
that's why I said co-captain.
The subordinate.
Right. Because I was like, well, that's a little different.
Am I your subordinate? I don't think
so.
Okay, I was like,
unless you want to be, but that's a different conversation.
That's not for the mics. That's listen. You've been married 5 years. You got to keep it interesting. We've been together 5 years. We haven't been married 5 years.
No, we've been married 3 years.
Yeah.
Feels like a long time though, because it's through COVID.
Dude, so. I don't think I think parenting is very hard. Like if people ask about like, talk about being parent, it's really difficult being a good parent. I don't think it's hard being married.
I don't either.
I think if you marry someone shitty or you yourself are not a good person or there's like something else in your life that's an issue, maybe. But I think being married is actually pretty easy, pretty great.
Yeah. I think when you choose partnership in alignment, it actually makes your life easier.
I cannot think of I miss a lot of things of my life pre-parenthood, just in terms of like freedom and time and energy and stuff, but I don't really miss anything from being single. I mean, the only thing I could kind of think of is like, theoretically, if I was like, I'm going to go do a DIY comedy tour, but like even that, you'd be like, yeah, we'll work it. You know what I mean? Like it's, my point is, marriage is great and easy if you do it with the right person.
I agree. So let me ask you this, because as we're moving into, I always ask all my misfits this, and I feel as though
I'm a misfit.
I think that you fall into that category for sure. I think that there's been a lot of, we can have you on the podcast another time if you want to dive deep and talk about, your own religious and spiritual identities and what that means and how does that fit in of, I think there's a lot of ways in which that's shown up for you, which is also why I think you're going to go on to do amazing work because you see the world differently. Mm-hmm. So I would ask you that, do you feel like there's parts of you that have made you feel like a misfit, but now you see them as something, as I would define it, as your superpower, but something less cheesy, of maybe it's the thing that you find is either your guiding light or the thing that fires you up?
I don't really know how to answer that. I'm sure it exists, but I wouldn't know how to, like, I know what I'm good at, but I don't know. In terms of like my religion and spirituality, I mean, I'm Jewish in the sense of like, that's my culture. That's how I was raised. I like certain elements of it. I don't feel particularly drawn to the Jewish religion. It's the one I know the most about and the most familiar with. But I don't, I've gone to church with your family and I've been to church services and like, that's, yeah, sure, that's fine too. I don't know a lot about like Islam and Hinduism, but I'd like to learn more, I guess, in some point in my life. But I do feel pretty confident in beyond nothing other than like my gut feeling that like nobody's gotten it right so far. Simply.
I love that so much.
Now, listen, I believe it is totally possible. Let's just use Christianity for an example, right? It's a pretty popular one. Totally possible and likely that Christ was a real person, and perhaps he even, is the Son of God, or was brought here by God to be a vehicle of preaching radical love and all that stuff. Yeah, absolutely. But the one thing with religion in general that drives me nuts is anyone who thinks like we got it right and everybody's wrong. It just does not make any practical sense. There's so many different corners of this planet of different types of people that the concept that there's like one way to if God is real, and if God is real in the sense of like he loves all of us, or it, or whatever you want. I'll just say he because it's easier for me. He loves all of us. He has a plan for all of us, yada, 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 which I don't know. I do believe that there is something higher than humans, of course. I don't know if I necessarily believe that, like, there's a God who casts judgments and loves everyone and yada, yada. But if that is the case, I cannot understand why anybody thinks that, like, yeah, absolutely our way of interpreting this book is right, and everybody else who doesn't see it our way burns in damnation forever. It's like, well, that's obviously to control people. It's obviously, and I've said this analogy to you before, there's a phrase, I'm going to butcher it, but there's a phrase, and it's something about how, like, movements start from a place of good, and then outside forces understand that there is power that they can co-opt by hijacking this movement, and they can use it to better themselves. That's happened with every social movement. I mean, pick any of the ones today, and you see that a lot of the people who started for good intention, they get pushed out of the way by bad actors who see they can get money and power and social status and whatever else for hijacking it. So it's like, I don't see how any religion wouldn't fall prey to that. That's not belittling the beautiful teachings of Christianity, Judaism, Islam. I don't know a lot about them in other faiths, but I'm sure they exist.
But I feel like as teachings and as religions and as value pillars, they are all beautiful in their own right. And that's what I always argue is it's like, I feel like we're all pretty much saying the same thing. But yeah, it's where that the weaponization of these things become an issue. And I mean, that's my biggest thing where I'm also like, you mean to tell me that if we're going to use the language of God. It's like that this all knowing God who created all of these things in the heavens and the earth. But he was like, listen, there's only one way. And it's also going to start with mostly Anglo-Saxons and, or it's Saxons, but
I know what you're saying.
That idea to me, it's the Luke Knowles song. It's like that God loves America or God loves white people or whatever that song is.
It's also, listen, humans, even by like modest archaeological records, we've been around for like 10,000 years, probably more. So you're telling me that like for 8,000 years, God was like, you're on your own. And then, or whatever. But anyway, I don't want to shit on religion too much because I think here's the other side of it. I think religion serves a very important purpose. It gives people community. It gives people guidance. Like, think about how even today, but especially in prior times, how unforgiving and brutal and horrific so much of life was. Yeah, of course, you're going to need some kind of spiritual religious identity to get you through that horrible pain. So that's not lost on me. I think for me, what I haven't really figured out the answer to is like what we're going to teach our kids. Now, I do know I would love for them to learn a lot, and they're going to learn a lot about their Jewish culture, the Christian side of the family, the other side of the family that's kind of more just like free spirit, hippy dippy, whatever. I think that's all great. And I personally am like, dude, what works for you? I know a lot of people who are very tied to their religion do not like this answer. But my attitude is like, whatever gets you there, man. whatever. That's the most, probably like the most liberal, hippie, free spirit thing about me.
But that to me is spirituality, because the idea of like, to me, you can't fake spiritual connection. Meaning, I talk about that a lot with my dad, where I'm like, but I could tell you that I believe a certain thing and I believe it exactly the way that you do, but doesn't that not matter? Because if God is understanding, if the universe is understanding of what's true to us, then all I'm doing is then not giving you my truth. And, it's like ultimately, even so much of what I want my spiritual work to do here is I wanted to connect to people to their higher Holy Spirit and whatever that means to them. And some people, they use the language of God and Jesus, and some people use the the language is neither here nor there. Again, it goes back to that idea of frequency. What is that feeling, that frequency that makes you feel whole, fulfilled, seen, safe, and protected?
Well, on that note, so I guess to really answer your question in full, how I've shifted since we've gotten together is and this is partly being with you, partly having kids. I used to be way more of like, back to the past lives visions thing, anything that I felt like was very foreign and kind of in that world, God, spirit, whatever, I was much more like, it's probably bullshit, but who knows? Now I'm much less, it's probably bullshit, and much more like, it absolutely could be. I just don't have a way to connect to it because I can't identify anything from my experience that makes me believe that like that is real. But I'm a skeptical person in general. Very just suspicious and skeptical of like everything. I don't know why, because I actually have had a pretty easy life. Like I've never been really scammed or taken advantage of, not in any serious way. So maybe that comes from a past life. Who knows? But I'm way less like, oh, that's all ridiculous, and much more like, yeah, dude, I don't know. I kind of wish I could see past lives. Be kind of cool. I wonder what my past lives were like.
Well, I know many people who would be happy to walk you through it.
I mean, I definitely have had.
I think it would be interesting for you, not because again, this is not the like spiritual Olympics where I like want you to, believe what I believe or anything, but meaning like even the reading I had, shout out to Nikki Novo. You guys know I love her. And I did a reading with her and she picked up a lot for you. And when I played it for you, you were like, who is this woman? And you were like, how would she?
I was impressed. I was very impressed.
So again, I think the more that you would be willing, even as just like a thought exercise of doing these things, I think even on an earthly level, if they were things that resonated enough for you, were like, oh, isn't that interesting?
I think what's hard for me with like all of the concepts of like God and the afterlife and spirits and all that stuff, not that stuff exists, but the idea that stuff exists in a way that like God has a plan for everyone. And it's simply because like there's not my personal experience, thank God, I'm very blessed, but like there's been so many and continue to be so many just horrible things that happen to like perfectly innocent good people. It's hard for me, and I've heard religious answers to this and they've never really satisfied me personally, but it's just hard for me to believe that there is like this all-loving superpower in the heavens that allows like these horrible things to occur. And, I've heard like, how arrogant could you be that you think you understand God's plan? Sure, fine. That's fine that you might feel that way. But I'm just telling you, on a personal level, it almost gives me more peace to be of the mind that like, I don't know, man, I think it's just random.
But I think that's the difference between God, where we've made it a man, we've made it a person, that there's a plan, that he sees everything. We've made it this very human thing so that we can wrap our minds around it, right? It gives purpose to the bad things that happen, to the good things that happen. Like it's something that we can wrap our mind about. Why I am so connected to the idea of the universe and staying open to miracles, that it's like these are all just energies and there's so much more going on beyond what we think.
So do you believe in demons?
Say more. What do you mean? Like an actual...
Well, like if there's like, good energy, there must be bad energy, right?
I do believe in dark energy for sure.
So then someone like who's an objectively evil person, Jeffrey Epstein, is he a demon or was he? Or you know what I'm saying? Or like,
well, I mean, I think when we talk about dark energies, I mean, let's even talk about like, I don't even know what his childhood was, where he came from. There's a lot that's shrouded around that. Like, I'm not, again, making that anything that happened to him was okay for what he did to other people. I want to be very, very fucking clear about that. Sure. But I
It doesn't come
also,
from nowhere.
that's what I mean.
Right.
Where it's not surprising to me that Donald Trump is the Donald Trump that you see before us. If your core
I mean, you want to talk about a Lord and Savior.
But I'm just saying, if your core needs...
I'm not a fan of Trump, for the record.
If your core needs were not met at a time, and that... So it's like, what do? You produce and you create something that is impenetrable. Because if you can't hurt me, then I'm not hurt. So really what you're seeing is you're seeing a 9-year-old boy who was neglected, not loved, and had thrown money at him. That's who you're seeing.
I think his father was an alcoholic too.
Yes. So that's what I'm saying. I do think, I definitely believe that there are dark energies, and I think that they present themselves in a lot of ways. Very sadly, I actually have a hard out right now because we could keep going, but
We've been going long enough.
I think so. But would you come back for season 4?
I would. I think if they just want to hear more of this, they should listen to Common Ground Morning Show.
Oh, tell me more about Common Ground.
Well, Common Ground Morning Show could change, but as of now, the plan is we're going to release it every Friday morning, kind of kick off your weekend, and we do a little bit. Well, basically, we find common ground every Friday morning. Little political talk, some of this kind of talk too. Go over some fun headlines. We have some other segments we're going to play around with, but it's kind of just us giving our take on the state of the world, how we see it, where we find common ground, and giving you guys advice. So please hit up Rachel if you've got questions you want answered in the pod. We're going to have more official ways to get a hold of us when Common Ground starts. But follow Rachel. She'll have all the stuff there. That was not my original podcast, but our original podcast together.
Yeah. It's been on hiatus through the move, the renovation, having a second baby. So we didn't want to bring it back until we knew we could recommit to it. So it's coming back in January, just in time for the wild ride that will be the political season. And quite a showdown as it will be. So it's going to be a lot of big, deep conversations. If you enjoy listening to married people argue on a public forum, you're really going to like it. And really just seeing what it's like to look at things both from an earthly lens and a spiritual lens. What does that mean? Talking about logic versus humanitarian issues. So there's a lot there that I think can be really beneficial. And plus, we're both fucking funny. So it's also really fun. So check that out. We'll put all of that in the show notes. Again, if you are interested, if you've got a corporate company, if you are starting a small business, if you have a personal brand and you're looking for the best ways to market it, produce it, podcasting questions, anything 360 digital media, I cannot recommend. He is my husband, but I also married him because he is the fucking best. And that's just the truth. I call him the ideas guy because he does not run out of them. So I know he's running some specials on typically his like a 60 to 90 minute session is $350, I believe. So he's gonna be running some sessions and some promo codes for that. So you're going to want to jump in on that. He's going to be opening up new sessions, I believe, January, February. And so he only releases so many at a time just so he can really work with clients and help them build out these ideas. So if you feel called, please go and check him out. We'll have all of that in the show notes. This was so fun. Thank you for doing this.
Anytime.
Love you.
Oh, thanks. I love you too.
Bye.
Okay.
Well, that's it. That's my husband. What do you think? It's so funny because we're so similar in so many ways that it's like, you know, when you talk about mirrors and people that you have in your life, like the things that drive me the most absolute batshit about him, I'm like, I know that's just because those are the shadow parts of me. I absolutely know that. So that's what's so funny is even the things that are so challenging to me about him, you know, sometimes we have that feeling of like, oh, I guess this person's not for me, or, you know, there's a difference between being challenged because it feels like that itch inside of us and somebody not showing up in a healthy relationship, right? They're two different things. So I love so much that you got to see and hear his very strong opinions and how things have informed him. And I just love his honesty, you know, that he could have come on here and been like, oh yeah, no, I see this. And oh yeah, no, I love tarot. And, you know, but I think his true willingness to stay open and participating in that journey is really beautiful and how it's informed him. I also think this is a great example of when, like, you don't have to be broadcasting to the world like, I'm changing, look at how I'm changing. Isn't it affecting you? That when we just show up as ourselves, the amount that you do shift things for people and that you don't ever know who's paying attention and you don't know who's watching. And sometimes those are even the people in your home. So even when you feel like the work that you're doing isn't making a difference, that you would be shocked how much that frequency, that love, that willingness, that courage to be vulnerable and shift and change really does affect people. So I'm so grateful that he came on and was vulnerable with me. If you guys liked that, Alex and I do have a podcast where we debate, sometimes spar. It can get very heated. All of the things that are going on in the world. That podcast is called Common Ground. We have a bunch of past seasons that you can go back and listen to. So you can find that and go ahead and subscribe and download the podcast wherever you check out your podcasts. That will also be on YouTube as well. You can go and follow Alex. All of his links will be in the show notes. But Common Ground will be coming back. So that's where, we debate all of the world's politics, everything that's going on. And we both come to things in a very different way, as I'm sure you just heard. And so it's really interesting. I think it's a great way to remind people that we don't all have to see things the exact same to find harmony and love amongst each other. And that's what Common Ground does the most for the both of us. So I'm excited for you guys to hear that. Have a wonderful Christmas. If you celebrate, have a wonderful Christmas. If you don't celebrate, then you just get a couple days off. And baby, who doesn't love that? Okay. So much more coming up in 2024. I'm so excited. We're going to be starting off January a little slow. The podcast is going to be going on hiatus. We are wrapping up season 3. Next week is our final episode of season 3. This has been the most transformative season for me, certainly. So many more of you have joined us when I had my Spotify Wrapped this year. It was so beautiful to see that so many of you, this is your top podcast or in your top 10. We're in over 27 countries. This is so exciting, and I'm so unbelievably humbled and grateful that you're here. And I'm going to give you even more of me, and I'm going to dig deeper and really bring you what it is that we are all deserving of. So I'm so grateful that you're here. Last thing, if you're down for downloading a new app, may I suggest the Every app? Every is a new game app where there are different games that are generated every day by mindfulness teachers, spirituality teachers, mental health authors, everybody within the space of self-improvement, kind of that big umbrella. They have created different games every day, and you can go and play the game, and then your data builds up over time so you can see your sense of growth. You can also cross compare it with people that are in your circle. You can add your friends, you can add strangers that you can connect with on this app. So again, that idea of common ground, that we are more alike than we are different. And my game on the Every app is dropping December 31st. So you can go and check out that game. So I'll be promoting that more and more. That promo code end of year is still available to you for $30 off for any and all of my offerings. We're going to be doing a bunch more live teachings in next year. So there's a lot coming down the pipe, baby. So get excited. But for now, rest, be with your loved ones, be with yourself, whatever it is that you need. Know that I'm proud of you. I'm glad you're here. Love you, mean it.
Time, weather, and